Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Solari Report. I'm joined today by somebody I've been listening to for a long time, Simon Dixon. I will tell you, Simon and I have two things very much in common. We both left investment banking disgusted by the corruption, and we were seeking freedom. And our pathways have been different, but I think, Simon, you and I are sort of looking for the same thing. How do you navigate an unbelievably corrupt financial system? And I really appreciate everything you've done to bring light to that and everything you're doing to try and help people be free under the circumstances. So many things to talk about. Some of your background, after you left investment banking in 2006, you created Back to the Future. That was the title of your book on Bitcoin, or?
Yeah, so I wrote a book on Bank to the Future, and we tried to create a non-fractional reserve bank called Bank to the Future as well.
Uh-huh. But now Bank to the Future, if you go to the Bank to the Future website, it's a fintech firm, correct?
Yeah, we're actually just manage assets. So we invested in all the major companies in Bitcoin, and we're not open to new customers. We were investing in the industry before Silicon Valley and everyone came in.
But you have extraordinary experience in investing in Bitcoin companies. So you've invested in the exchanges and a wide variety of Bitcoin related companies. So you have a lot of experience as an asset manager and investor and venture capitalist in the Bitcoin area, right?
Yeah, I mean, invested in about 100 companies, some of the big names. I won't tell you the failures, but some of the big names are Coinbase, Kraken, Bitstamp, Bitfinex, Circle, Ripple Labs, Robinhood, blockchain.com, Exodus. So some of the biggest names in Bitcoin were in that portfolio amongst the failures.
Right. Well, here's what's interesting, though. You've learned a lot from failures. So it started with your dad losing his pension fund in the dot-com bubble, which I can't imagine how frustrating that must have been. I was very frustrated during the dot-com bubble. And then, but you had one custodian fraud, essentially, or one fraud in the Bitcoin space or the crypto space.
Yeah.
And you lived through the bankruptcy experience, which is quite an extraordinary experience.
Absolutely, yeah. So my journey in finance began when my father spent his whole life going from rags during World War II in Bristol, and then making his first £1 million throughout his whole life, and then losing the whole thing in the stock market. And so he didn't know what he was doing. And he asked me, son, who's got my money? Where is my money? And I didn't know how to answer that question. So I spent the next 25 years on that journey answering that question for my father, which he actually passed away in 2002 on the day that Celsius, the Ponzi scheme and fraud that I was a shareholder in and invested in, closed its door to 650,000 victims.
And wasn't it a crypto firm? Or if it was 2002, that would have been too early.
Did I say 2002? 2022.
Yeah. Right, 22.
So 3 years ago.
Right.
And and that took 650,000 victims, some of whom lost their entire lifetime savings by investing in Celsius, by a fraudster called Alex Majinsky, who's been serving 12 years now. But in that whole experience, I learned how corrupt the Chapter 11 system is as well.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. So that was I read 4,000 documents, every single court documents, attended every single court hearing virtually, and participated in the process on maximizing the recovery for all those victims. And that took about 2 years of my life. Fortunately, Bitcoin had treated me very well. My father lost all his money from fraud, and then he passed away on the same day. So I kind of dealt with my bereavement by losing myself in a Chapter 11 case, and helping many retirees and pensioners that thought there would be no return. Some committed suicide, sadly. Others had to move countries. But we maximized what we could from the recovery using Bitcoin and law and Chapter 11 and many of the nuances from it, and making sure justice was served. And justice was served.
Yeah, you're lucky though. I was an investment advisor for 10 years after leaving investment banking, and I helped a couple people clean up for Madoff, and it's just extraordinary to watch what can happen and what did happen. Okay, well, let me keep going. You had one of the first books on, or the first book on Bitcoin, but now you have a very successful podcast called Bitcoin Hard Talk. You're on 107th episode. Am I correct?
Yes, and I go live every week, following the money. This week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, this week in geopolitics. And some people don't know how, technology, macroeconomics, and geopolitics actually all connect. So I connect all the dots and follow the money each week.
Yeah, it's one thing I like to do the same. Okay, so we're going to dive in, and I want to start with stable coins because stable coins is something that I watched the Fed work on potentially doing a CBDC and then flip the framework with Treasury into stable coins that could be set up to be programmable money. Something I'm very concerned about, but clearly indicating that stablecoins was going to help them accept dollar dominance. But if you look at their projections, I know, and you spent a lot of time looking at stablecoins, and I think you understand it very well. If you look at their projections, they're basically Basan is saying he expects to issue 3 trillion by the end of the decade. Now, at the current deficit run, you need 10 trillion by the end of the decade, not including what you need to roll over the huge amount that you've got with short maturities. So 3 trillion is just a drop in the bucket. So my question to you is, do you think that they're planning on being able to issue way more than the 3 trillion they're talking about?
Yeah, so this relates to Genius Act. So what I'll do is I'll answer that question and go back to history of stable coins a bit and then bring it to where it is now. But Genius Act is the new regulations under the Trump administration. There's a couple of key clauses that the bank lobby made sure that they got. The first was that you can take the reserves at the Fed and you can use them to back a stable coin. And so there's approximately 3.5 trillion at its peak there. It went down a bit to 2.8 trillion recently, but obviously from the government shutdown, we had this like treasury account and all that stuff, and craziness on that side. But the point is, there's about $3 trillion that, in theory, through Genius Act, can be turned into a stable coin as long as you have a banking license.
Right.
And so that is the way of ensuring that the stable coins and leveraging up the reserves can happen. And also, if you have a banking license, you're able to pay yield directly on your stablecoin. So to understand what stablecoins are, it's worth studying a bit of the history. So I invested in a company called Bitfinex, and they were the ones that acquired the first ever stablecoin that they later changed the name to Tether. And Bitfinex, essentially, it was really hard to go from one exchange to another, because if you put your dollars in one exchange, then to try and get it back into banking and arbitrage and go to another exchange, you'd probably get your bank account shut in the process and you wouldn't be able to arb. It might take you 3 weeks, to get through that arb. Which is useless. And so essentially, Bitfinex, the exchange, purchased some technology and rebranded it Tether. I think it was originally called True USD or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they realized that through this mechanism, a lot of the other exchanges started using Tether as an alternative to having a bank account, because when you're running an exchange, the hardest problem is the banking relationship.
Right.
And so, other exchanges took the fact that they didn't need a bank account and launched, and one of them was Binance. And so in 2017, this little arbitrage stablecoin became the backbone of the banking system for Binance.
Mm-hmm.
And Binance became the largest crypto exchange in the world now, with about almost 300 million users. And they built the whole thing because they didn't need to deal with the banking issue, but that burdened Bitfinex with the banking issue. And so we ended up in a scenario where all the banks then shut down the banking behind Bitfinex and Tether. And at one stage, Tether was getting governments that would seize certain, certain bank accounts. And then that meant that the way that Tether was designed is you issue a coin and every coin is backed by $1, but you obviously don't leave billions of dollars in a bank account because your FDIC risk is through the roof. So you have to then re-lend it to the US government by buying short-term treasuries. And so they have to be short dated because if somebody wants to redeem their Tether, for those dollars, then if they don't have those reserves in cash at a bank, they need to sell the treasuries and then settle the dollars. And that was kind of, the idea. But once you went into Tether, very few people went out. And so they ended up with billions and billions of dollars, and today are now the 18th largest lender to the US government.
Right.
And then they would take the yield that they would receive because these, sending a digital dollar is easy as sending an email in kind of an innocent until proven guilty system. So they could be freezed, they could be censored, they're subject to all OFAC rules, but you could send them. And then if you're innocent first, and then they have to prove you're guilty, and then freeze them and seize them. So that was very useful, particularly in countries that wanted to protect themselves and use a digital dollar, couldn't get a bank account. And so what they would end up doing, as the yield on short-term treasuries went from the ZERP environment to a higher environment, higher interest environment, suddenly they became the most profitable company in the world.
Right. They weren't sharing any of the float with the customer, were they? Right. So they got the whole float.
Yeah, so they got the whole yield, and then they'd take the yield and buy Bitcoin and invest in Bitcoin mining operations. And so they'd end up, building all these Bitcoin mining operations around the world. They'd have, and then as the price of Bitcoin went up, they never needed to sell the Bitcoin. And so it reached the stage where, they were more profitable than BlackRock and Citibank. And they only had like 100 staff. And so it created this incredible arbitrage between the dollar and Bitcoin, where essentially in the end, through this crazy turn of events, the US government was paying Tether to hold one of the largest Bitcoin positions. This kind of realization of what happened with Tether led to the realization that you can create these neo fintech banks. The government realized that they could find a new home to roll over debt.
Right.
And then other companies realized that they could try and use similar arbitrages to end up with Bitcoin on their balance sheet, and companies like Strategy and various other things. But it all came from that little thing.
Yeah, and also what you've got is you've got the Fed that's trying to coming out of the pandemic is trying to drop its treasury position because you've gotten shorter and shorter. You've got more to roll every year, and most foreign investors are downsizing their treasury position. So you are very eager to find new markets, and essentially what you discovered is that with a stable coin you can basically turn treasury bills into a little currency, right?
Yeah. And then you look at the scale. So the market's, about, let's say, 300 billion now. But you talked about the big numbers. So there's $10 trillion to roll over. So, it's kind of, the stable coin industry is comparable to about the amount of tariff revenue that has come in. So these incremental improvements are not changing the model. So
Right.
what we're witnessing on the macro environment right now is they need to roll over their debt. And we're seeing this big spike in terms of Cayman Islands as the largest foreign lender to the US government, which we know is a tiny economy. So that's all the hedge funds and shenanigans that are happening in the background.
I always believed that they basically worked with a hedge fund, so the hedge funds could take could borrow short, lend long, or borrow long, lend short. They could work the federal credit arbitrage and finance their position. And basically, if you look at how they interacted with them, it was a no risk position on their part.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're witnessing that, that essentially this is just ultra financialized, and the government is just subsidizing all this rampant speculation. And stable coins is just another mechanism for doing it. So the Trump administration, via his family, launched their own one. And they started doing, Trump started doing all these covert deals, which would combine tariff with foreign direct investment, with issuing a stable coin, with Gulf countries looking to build like a tax neutral kind of stable coin rail between America
Right.
and the Gulf countries. And then obviously that ties into all the massive geopolitical shifts, because the Gulf countries historically were there to prop up the petrodollar, but now America competes as an energy exporter. And so, where does the Gulf get all of its sovereign wealth that's making all these investments? Well, its largest customer is China. And so, you've got Chinese money via Gulf tax neutral jurisdictions with stablecoin rails facilitating all of this foreign direct investment, where essentially the Gulf countries are buying up America. And then you've got these deals that the Trump administration are doing. I'll dive into one. Basically the Abu Dhabi and UAE sovereign wealth fund, they wanted to invest in Binance, which we talked about, the largest exchange. That was essentially taken down by the DOJ. The founder, CZ, got a 4-month sentence, but clearly managed to negotiate turning Binance into an asset, because one of the conditions of the settlement, after paying the $47 million fine, was that the U.S. government would become the compliance department for Binance. And so there was this massive data extraction exercise on these 285 million accounts. And then the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund said, we'd like to invest $2 billion in Binance. And so after Trump, went and did his tour of the Middle East, he came back and said, well, if you want to invest in Binance, do it via my new stablecoin through a company called World Liberty Financial that the Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump have created, with Steve Witkoff as the main investor, the envoy to the Middle East that's negotiating these deals, and said, you put $2 billion in this account, we'll buy treasuries, while the rate's artificially high. That gives us $60 million of passive income every year. And then we'll issue $2 billion of our stablecoin USD1. Then Binance will support that stablecoin as one of their stablecoins. CZ will get pardoned. And now we've facilitated $2 billion of trade by doing one of these deals. And so every time you hear about these foreign direct investment and these crypto policies, you can just follow the money and figure out what's happening here. But essentially, there is capital outflows. The Gulf are buying up all the assets. Trump is facilitating the reverse IMF strategy, as it were,
right,
where the Gulf countries are buying. And you've got these crypto rails and stablecoins that are being built so that, and then at the same time, there is a big macro policy. What's the macro policy at the moment? Well, it's fiscal dominance. It's spend the economy, screw the economy. Everything's on the stock market. Roll over the debt as much as possible. Invest as much in, these AI contracts, these military contracts. Make sure that they circulate around the stock market to, get these GDP prints. Make the GDP print look great, make the stock market look great, and then simultaneously basically knock the interest rate down, 300 basis points is the stated goal, to about 0.25%. So essentially, you're inflating away the debt, you're screwing the economy for those that own the assets, you're making that K-shaped economy go like crazy. And then you're going to get the stable coins and the pension funds in a deregulated environment with all of these lower interest rate treasuries. So you're asking the stablecoin issuers and the American people through these Cayman Island elaborate schemes, deregulation, to subsidize below market debt in an environment where the US government and US treasuries have never been riskier. You know that because the 20-year and 30-year treasuries, they're going up. They're fluctuating around this 5 and 6%, 4 to 6%, depending on the duration. But he's trying to get the short-term treasuries at 0.25%, which essentially means, fiscal dominance, stablecoin issuers, dump it in the pension funds, and just run this crazy experiment of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, which is just leading to this extreme populism and very unstable, economy that we're witnessing right now.
So I don't know if you ever watched Tim Dillon, but he's a comedian who does sort of a news show, and he said we used this in the annual wrap up. He said under Trump, America's become, and he kind of looks off in space, and he says an auction. Unfortunately,
that's
what
I mean, essentially, presidents are what narrative do we need to tell people in order to sell bonds? They're all bond salespeople. I think it was Scott Bessent that said, "My job is I'm a bond dealer." That is my job, and that is accurate.
Well, but here's what's interesting. I haven't done a complete survey, but if you look at certainly state pension funds, they've downsized a lot from the Treasury market to buy private equity. And if you think they would have gotten clocked on their Treasury bonds, wait do you see what's happening to them on private equity? It's worse. So
I'm very familiar with private equity because that's where, on Bitcoin private equity was my game.
Right.
And
exactly.
The challenge with private equity is the lack of ability to price. But the way you price it, because, at Bank to the Future, we always had to give, we have to submit to our regulators what is the value of the assets that you are custodying for your customers. And therefore, we'd have to make a price on an illiquid asset. And the methodology you'd have to use is mark to market. But where is the market? Well, it's the last funding round, or maybe someone does a secondary trade.
Right.
And so you have these elaborate ways of trying to figure out what is the value of these very highly illiquid assets that may take 7 to 10 years to mature.
Right.
And in the end, you find out that the way most people market is they use you engage in a smaller secondary trade where two investors agree to trade with each other. That sets the price. But it could have been via some covert mechanism that two of your LPs or sophisticated investors traded with each other just to set the price. Then you market to market. And then now, if you're able to dump that into a deregulated pension environment, you can essentially have these valuations that at some stage, with private equity, we had about a 25% hit rate, which is one of the best in the industry. But 75% of those are going to be marked to zero at some stage.
Right.
And that is a very inappropriate mechanism for pensions. But obviously, you talk about it as if we're bringing access to all the big deal flow, to you. But no, it's exit liquidity. That's exactly what it's going to be.
Right. Okay. So back to stable coins. Here's the question. I don't know. I don't know where you were in 1989. What year? Where were you in 1989?
I was 9 years old in Bristol.
So you probably don't remember when the wall came down in Berlin. There were great discussions that it was going to take 10 years to unify Germany. They would have to have negotiations and treaties and everything else. And the chancellor just literally in the first, very early on, just said, okay, we offer a sweet premium to the East Germans to come in the Deutschmark. And literally the country was unified overnight through the currency. Mm-hmm. Now, if you look at what the U.S. says it's going to do with stablecoins, it's basically going to go out and try to offer stablecoins to every citizen of the planet who can access through the mobile payment systems, through Apple Pay, Google Pay, whatever, can access stablecoins and get them off of their local currency and onto stablecoins, right? So you're basically making a tender for 8 billion citizens and saying, get off your currency, come on our currency. Now, the question that I don't understand the answer to is how many countries can stop you from moving on to a US dollar denominated stablecoin? Does China, I'm assuming China has the hardware to stop this.
Yeah, this is an ultra interesting question because it does come back into the capital controls. And then it comes into a conversation that I think we both have aligned in from studying your content. That we're actually who rules the world and who's making these decisions. Is America really sovereign? Is America first? And I've spent a lot of time in trying to answer that question. How can we, particularly in the UK, how can you be in an environment where there's record mental illness, there's low birth rates, there's drug addiction, the bins aren't being collected anymore. There's clear immigration operations in order to create racial and religious tensions. And yet there's still $3 billion to defend democracy and send to Zelensky. How do these two things compute? Well, they don't until you figure out who's actually in charge, and our governments are not sovereign.
Right.
So Keir Starmer does not work for the British people. Trump does not work for the American people. Macron does not work for the French, and Merz doesn't work for the Germans. They actually work for their lobbies, and that pay for them, and their lobbies are corporate interest. And within corporate interest, you have what I try to classify as powerful factions. The most powerful is what I call the financial industrial complex.
Right.
That's the banks, the money printers that create the dollars and the euros and the pounds. They own the Federal Reserve.
Right.
You have the private equity industry. You have the venture capital industry. You have the investment bank that financializes and securitizes everything. And then you have the ability to control all of that access, the passive investment flows, which is the ETFs and money managers. And so ultimately, on the top of this power structure is the sovereign wealth and the money managers, because everything's public and every politician is for sale through lobby. And so ultimately, you have this financial industrial complex which can vassalize all of what looks like you think Tesla is a powerful company run by the richest man in the world like Elon, but actually he is allowed to be the highest net worth person,
right,
as long as he gets those Pentagon budgets and various other budgets into the right place, and then
right,
they will lend him money against his stock in order to keep him in the network, as it were, because they can knock you off the network by sending the hedge funds on your share price, sending the derivatives complex on you. And then they can they can give you a margin call. So through this access to capital, you have this financial industrial complex that actually, is able to control many of the levers.
One of my nicknames for it is the financial bazooka. You're facing the financial bazooka.
Yeah, I use a few words: financial weapons of mass destruction, financial terrorism. I like financial bazookas.
Yeah.
And so, these are useful terms in really describing what is a reality.
Right.
And so then you ask, right, well, what is the goal? Is the goal really to save the dollar? Well, when I look at what a company like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard are doing, I see capital flows that are pricing new financial products in foreign currencies. I see policies that are being influenced in order to weaken the dollar.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you push this stablecoin strategy, you have this tension between strengthening the dollar and weakening the dollar. Now, if you weaken the dollar, you set a series of events, kind of reverse Bretton Woods 2, which is, if you're a country like Saudi Arabia, you've got vast sovereign wealth, you've got resources, you've got trade surplus, you've got fiscal surplus. You've got what are you going to do when your currency is pegged to the dollar? Well, if you weaken the dollar, you have to actually sell treasuries and sell your gold reserves to protect the peg.
Right.
Now, you might do that for a little bit of while, but if you look at Saudi Arabia, they're actually, through the Gulf countries, they're the largest investors in BlackRock. They have Saudi Aramco CEO has a board seat on BlackRock. And so you've seen this partnership between the Gulf countries and the financial industrial complex emerge. And so, therefore, at some point, the financial industrial complex can send monetary policy wherever it wants because its banks are the shareholders in the Fed.
Right.
It dominates fiscal policy. BlackRock, like a lot of the fund managers use Aladdin as their data sources, which is BlackRock technology. Treasury uses it. The Fed uses it. And so you've got all these data feeds that go out to all of this vast network of capital. And when I look at what they're signaling by following the money, they're signaling that they're trying to weaken the dollar and they're trying to push it into multipolarity. And so what I see right now in this chaos is a tension between different factions, because while the financial industrial complex is the most powerful, there are other complexes. There's the military industrial complex. That was more nationalistic. That was create wars globally in order to get the world addicted to IMF debt through covert operations. But it was all about propping up the dollar, strengthening the dollar. And then you have the technical industrial complex, which is all the data feeds, all the surveillance, all of the backdoors into NSA, deep state, and that works its way up to military. And so you have these power factions that are often aligned. But I believe right now we have a tension between strengthening the dollar through military industrial complex operations, technical industrial complex operations like stablecoins. But ultimately, the financial industrial complex, they want the world to be, I believe, multipolar, which I think is a conclusion you came to.
Right.
And they want to partner with these different blocks. And so ultimately they will win, which to me translates into a weaker dollar, breaking the pegs, dismantling the petrodollar, dismantling the euro dollar, and supporting the petro yuan, so that eventually the Gulf countries can sit between the BRIC blocks through the GCC blocks and be at the center between America as a regional power dominating the region. But the dollar needs to be shrunk to a regional currency. It's no longer the global hegemon.
They seem to have concluded that the one world thing doesn't work, and you need these. You basically need, America running North and South America, and China and Russia, running the other block.
Yeah, with the Gulf sovereign wealth in the middle, with tax neutral, and then rails. And so this is why there's a push to essentially, figure out what is the forever war model is coming to an end in the Middle East. Now that's framed as Trump is the president of peace. No, this is the financial industrial complex, which has been negotiating to say, right, the military companies, which they're all public companies as well.
Right.
So they have the finance rules all in the end, but they enter into these games in order to determine the outcome. And I believe that the money managers hedge all the outcomes. They hedge, they could use the deep state in order to escalate attention. But more and more of those covert operations have been failing because there's competing powers. That means that, okay, more and more of our operations are failing.
Right.
And so what we can do is let's enter into these games, which is, things like the Greater Israel Project, Ukraine, and let's create as much chaos as possible so that the finance companies and the Gulf countries can enter into this negotiation. And the Gulf countries are saying, we want regional stability. We want control of our region. The financial industrial complex is saying, well, if I'm going to stop the military and the Greater Israel Project and the Forever War Project, what are you going to give me? And so they're negotiating over Syria, they're negotiating over Lebanon, they're negotiating over Palestine, Israel, the entire Levant. And they're deciding who's going to get who's going to control what flows. And then now they're essentially saying, and the whole catalyst for this in that area of the region was the rise of China,
Right.
America becoming an energy exporter, competing with the Gulf countries, and then the Gulf countries getting all of their revenue from selling energy to China. And so China came along and said, hey, we can de-dollarize here. If BRICS align with the Gulf countries and we play these games, and then you negotiate with America and the region and the financial industrial complex, we can get a military exit. And so therefore you had all these signals like Xi Jinping and China came out and normalized between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Now we're getting essentially the full vassalization of Israel, Lebanon, Yemen, all of these regions, and the only way you can do that is to resolve the Palestinian issue, normalize between Iran and Saudi Arabia, stop having the military use Israel as a tool for conflict and destabilization, and allow it to be a normal state, and then simultaneously, the military, the military exit slowly in exchange for financial stability, and so all of these deals are being negotiated.
Yeah, so I agree. All these deals are being negotiated. I'm not sure they want Israel to be a normal state. I mean, I think what they wanted was they wanted to basically clear Gaza, redevelop it in a way that Israel could be a very big part of what I call the control grid. So a major player in the control grid, but I think you're right, not a major player in basically starting wars all over the Middle East.
Yeah, and that tension that's definitely what they wanted. It was, let's take all of the technology that is completely illegal, we could never do in America. We do that via Israel.
Right.
When these companies need legitimization, they get acquired by Google and rolled in.
Right.
But all the covert, really illegal stuff that we could never get congressional approval for, that's unconstitutional, we do that via Israel. And then, we want Israel to stop being funded for destabilization and instead gain as much territory as possible. If you can ethnically cleanse the Palestinians, then they tried to get Egypt to take the Palestinians. They said, we'll pardon the $18 billion IMF debt if you take them in. And then, and then Jordan held the fort, Egypt held the fort. But why did they do that? Because there was a competing tension, which is China and BRICS backing the Gulf countries as the most important customer, saying, no, we want as least power for the financial industrial complex in the Middle East.
Right.
And we want to give you as much power, and we will then reinvest through the Belt and Road Initiative in these different tensions. And so that's Israel essentially is Greater America project for the financial industrial complex.
Right. Right. They're very much part of. So I absolutely agree with that framework. One of the things I do think, there's one story I want to tell you, and then I'll talk about China in a second. 9/11, literally. So I'm in the middle of litigating with the Department of Justice, and in the process, I'm working with about 12 different major Washington law firms. Either on my side or their side, and ancillary litigation. So I'm just dealing with partners from big Washington law firms. I never heard the word Dubai out of any of their mouths. And then the day after 9/11, suddenly they're all going to Dubai like that.
Yeah.
It was like somebody hit a switch and literally Dubai was open for business and every major Washington law firm was going to Dubai. It was beyond belief and very much a structured, planned phenomena. And to this day, when you move the army to the Middle East, then you can move a lot of other stuff to the Middle East. It's pretty clear. But Dubai was off and running.
Yeah, absolutely. I've spent a lot of time studying those operations. The conclusions that I came to is, there was definitely factions of CIA, Saudi intelligence, and Israeli intelligence involved in different parts of that operation.
And British intelligence is always there. the
British
hardest to see,
intelligence
but they're
created the
always
model.
there.
Yeah,
Right.
MI6 was all over the Middle East, and Africa and everywhere. Yeah, the previous
Right.
colonies, and so you had that, and yeah, it's I mean, you can just read the actual FBI
Right.
documents
Right.
and see the bits that were whitewashed. The Mossad agents.
I was the first person to write. I published it on September 17th that the official story was hogwash. So
Amazing. I have to go back and learn all of your work and get back to it because for some reason the algorithms didn't put you in front of me.
really,
But as soon as I found your work, I was like, how have we not been connected? But the algorithms didn't let us meet.
yeah. So my 9/11 claim to fame was I wrote an article accusing Condoleezza Rice during her official testimony on 9/11 of lying. And I sent it to Rice, the president, the vice president. It got picked up by UPI, went viral. And 3 days later, I was poisoned and almost didn't make it. So
Wow. Okay. And all the anthrax operation to connect it to Iraq.
I started a group called Unanswered Questions, myself and three other activists working with Scoop Media in New Zealand. And we took the position that we can't produce an evidentiary train, so we can't figure out what really happened, but citizens can ask questions. And we ran a process where citizens all over the world were sending in and we were batching and bringing forth their questions, including to the commission. And that turned into Paul Thompson's timeline. I don't know if you're familiar with his timeline. And essentially what it showed was the official narrative was complete bunk. Anyway, so my interest in 9/11 was there was money going missing from the federal government, and many of the offices and buildings involved in that money going missing were blown up. And that happens wherever you have financial fraud. You tend to find that buildings with the records blow up. So
Yeah.
that was that was one of the great blowups. Okay, let me go back to stablecoins. What what do you think the possibilities are in terms of what kind of market share stablecoins can build worldwide? Do you think Basant's $3 trillion is a reasonable estimate, or low or high?
Well, again, I think you can. So I think the goal is to turn the dollar into a regional currency, which means weakening the dollar. But if you wanted to get $3 trillion, then you just launch a stablecoin based upon the Federal Reserves. Now, what level of adoption it will get, you probably need an operation like how about pay every American $2,000, and now you've done it.
Right.
You can get everyone to have their $2,000, maybe roll over. This is the types of gateway drugs where you download an app, get your $2,000. It's going to destroy you anyway because it's just going to be a stimulus to the market,
Right.
create more wealth inequality, and just help the wealthy class. And then if you're smart, you'll put it in assets to try and beat inflation. So that helps the market anyway.
Right.
The rest will just pay off some interest on their debt because it would just give them a little bit of money to pay their bank interest. Um, but you can get them to opt into the terms and conditions of the stable coin.
Right. So I think a lot of the control is going to come through the terms and conditions.
I absolutely agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can see where we're creeping up to, like with the ancillary companies. So, you got the PayPal mafia. So you've got you got Elon Musk that suddenly has access to vast data through Doge, pretending they're going to pay down the national debt. If anyone needs to hear this, the dollar is debt. You can't pay down the debt. The dollar is debt. There is no such thing. If you want to pay down the debt, you'll trigger the Great Depression like we've never seen
Right.
before. So, any belief that you're going to pay down the debt without radically taking on the financial industrial complex, reforming the whole system, and doing something radically different in terms of money, it is the only way you can do that. And that's not happening. This is a rollover scheme not pay off the debt.
Right.
And so you've got, what do we do? So we have Doge. Then we have, turn all our cars into data with Tesla. Then we have, let's go to the financial industrial complex. Let's make Jack Dorsey sell X. I'll borrow against my Tesla stock to buy it and then co-invest with the Gulf countries. You'll start to see that as a reoccurring theme. You got people that are meant to be these entrepreneurs that are the richest people in the world, but their net worth is dependent upon their stock price, and the financial industrial complex lends money against their stock price as a control mechanism. And so that's how they get them in compliance. And then they always co-invest with the Gulf countries. So this is a reoccurring theme. Got levered billionaire American entrepreneurs that borrow against their stock in order to invest with the Gulf countries.
Right. And have to do what they're told.
Absolutely. And so you have to give a backdoor to NSA. And then so you get to buy X. Now X becomes the freedom of speech platform. What does that mean? So we kind of did that censorship thing. When we tried to stop people talking about vaccines and everything, it's kind of reached the point where why don't we try something different? Why don't we push the world into this artificial intelligence, push all of these budgets into an AI war with China, which means it's a national security risk if we don't put billions and billions and billions and billions and billions into artificial intelligence and data centers.
Right, but they're not trying to win the war.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think there is a war. I think China already won the war, and this is the execution of the world order of multipolarity based upon BlackRock's tariff policy, not Trump's tariff policy.
Right.
Tariff was a perfect way of engineering this. And so you get freedom of speech, not freedom of reach. What does that mean? It's saying, well, we won't draw attention to your content, but we'll let you speak. Say everything you believe in. Talk about Israel, talk about Zionism, talk about how you hate the Muslims, talk about jihad, talk about whatever you want, talk about misogyny, talk about everything that creates massive, massive tensions. You get your freedom of speech, which I'm glad for because, I'm going to utilize it while I can. But you're building your social credit score.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And so Elon was that. And then you've got, Peter Thiel, Palantir, all of the,
Twitter's really a honey trap.
Yeah.
It's really a surveillance device and a honey trap. But absolutely. I'm with you. I use it while it's still available. Okay,
well, you have to lean into it. You got no choice. We're all in this.
Right. We are all in this. Let's talk about asset tokens and crypto. I have tried for years to understand what the plan is with asset tokens. And for the life of me, I can't figure it out. It was one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you. I can't figure it out. And part of it is usually, I think they're making it up as they go. I think the plans are fluid. They're trying things, but I just finished reading the Clarity Act for the third time. So the House has passed an act called the Clarity Act that if the Genius Act regulated stablecoins or set up a regulatory framework for stablecoins, the Clarity Act is supposed to create a regulatory framework for almost everything else, including asset tokens. And it after passing the House, it's gone over to the Senate, and the Senate came back with a very different version, including a fair amount on something called affinity asset, which is regulated by the SEC. So one of the issues is what will be regulated by the CFTC and what will be regulated by the SEC. So that's one of the issues. Now they're saying they're going to have that passed by Thanksgiving, which is this Thursday. Do you have any idea if the Clarity Act really will pass this year?
It's going to pass no matter what. Whether it passes this Thursday or not, I'm not too sure. I don't get too engaged in the political process of the timing of the passing. But this is going to pass because this is the financial industrial complex's policy.
Right.
This isn't a resistance against Wall Street. This is a strategy, for Wall Street.
Yeah,
for Wall Street.
So one of the things that has had me baffled is if you look at how they describe the use of asset tokens, they're very conceptual and very vague. So if you listen to Larry Fink, he's saying every stock and bond, all securities will have a asset token that mirrors it. And for some reason, this is attractive. I'm assuming on the theory that putting it on a blockchain or making it programmable will somehow make the clearance settlement management system easy. But the nuts and bolts of what they're going to do and how they're planning on doing it is not clear. It's not clear from listening to them, and it's not clear from reading the Clarity Act.
Yeah.
So now in Washington, when we wanted to understand what a bill was before we'd read it, we'd take the name and then we would invert it. So if it said, community, making communities wonderful, it was like, oh, rape and gentrify and plunder places, and so we would just invert the name. So when they call it the Clarity Act, you invert the name and it's like, total confusion here. So do you have any clear picture of how they want to use asset tokens, particularly in connection with the securities and derivative markets?
Yeah. So, firstly, it's important to understand where this came from. So, um, you have Bitcoin, which is a bearer asset. There's no physicality. It exists as maths and code. You can own it on your own device. You can send it, but what you're sending is the asset. It's a bearer asset. Now, what Wall Street and the financial industrial complex have tried to do is turn that bearer asset into a custodied security, which is Bitcoin ETFs, companies like Strategy. And so what they want to do is encourage you not to own a bearer asset, but own it with them. And then they give you a security or a Wall Street wrapper on top of it. Now, with the real world asset, what we have found throughout this whole industry, we used to call them security tokens. They later got called real world asset. We had gold backed tokens. Throughout the entire history of blockchain, we've been doing all sorts of stuff with what else could you do? And in the end, you go round this absolute merry-go-round of distraction and realize that when you take a bearer asset, i.e., a cryptographic token that you can send to anybody else, it doesn't really matter if it's backed by something else, because the something else in custody is held with a centralized custodian, and it backs down to law. Because I could say this token gives me a piece of gold, but if someone won't give me a piece of gold for it, then it doesn't really matter. You use the legal system at that stage to try and rely on whether this gold can be redeemed, whether this token can be redeemed for gold. And so as soon as you connect physical world to digital world, everything breaks, because it then relies on trust. And the whole point of Bitcoin was a trustless way to send transactions with no bank,
Right.
no central bank.
Right.
And so what you've done is this really a bit scammy way of saying, let's take all of these securities, like tokens and stuff like that and assets, and let's turn them into commodities, and let's turn commodities into securities. And so you can basically transform the nature of these products depending on whether you want them to be an SEC or CFTC, which is why this is the real friction point here. Because what does it actually do? Well, if you tokenize a real world asset, like a gold ETF or a gold backed token, you essentially give the gold to the custodian and you get a security or a representation of that gold in return. So you centralize the actual asset while giving people a token.
You centralize it, but you also do something else, which is, traditionally what they've done when they centralize it this way, they've expanded it, whether it's through naked short selling or collateral fraud. So, yeah, I don't know if you've ever read the prospectus for the BlackRock ETF for Bitcoin. They don't even pretend to have the Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
They said it's an investment to achieve a performance like Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly.
I've never,
so
yeah, I've never,
BlackRock ETF doesn't have any Bitcoin. They have a Coinbase IOU that promises that they have some Bitcoin in custody.
Right. Exactly. So it is a scam.
Yes.
Right.
Now it comes with a few more benefits. Firstly, when you centralize it, you've got the ability to do the lending against it, use it as collateral, build the derivatives complex, and engage in fractional reserve Bitcoins essentially. But do the same. But then with the token, you get a few more interesting things. You get the full neoliberal dream of assets that can be sent completely globally, completely programmable. So in the current version of the system, you can't go from the New York Stock Exchange to the Tokyo Stock Exchange without an incredibly complex process and floating some of the stock on both markets. With this, in theory, you could open up all of these different markets into one market. So you can centralize it all.
So suddenly I can trade the Tokyo Exchange and the Swiss Exchange using the token in a way that's much more liquid and easy for me.
Yes. You can send it from one exchange to another, which is something you can't currently do easily. You can also make it programmable. And so you can then put the surveillance state in, and you can say, in transferring this token, if your social credit score says this, then you can have all the iterations of central bank digital currencies and the privatized version through stable coins and all that stuff. So in terms of like a World Economic Forum, globalist, Larry Fink, BlackRock type of vision, tokenizing everything is incredible. You get to securitize, financialize, and tokenize. You can do it with your carbon credit scores. You can turn that into a token. You can do it with everything. If you haven't got the right ESG score as an individual, you could, yeah.
But how does the token relate to the asset? In other words, can you only tokenize something if you own it?
It doesn't
or
relate
can
to
you
the
create
asset.
a token on things that you don't own?
It's a promise. So when you connect the digital with the physical, it's just legal system and promise. There is no way of connecting that. And so you're just centralizing everything in custody, giving people a programmable digital asset that you can then perpetuate and put out in the world. But if you ever try to exchange that asset for the actual underlying commodity, you rely upon the legal system and trust and the custody structure. So it doesn't change anything really other than making everything programmable 24/7, and the illusion of self-custody when the actual asset is in custody.
Well, but if you want to soak up a huge amount of credit and money created, that normally would turn into pure inflation of real assets. If you create more and more digital assets or digital commodities, you just have a way of soaking up all this money.
Yeah, you can soak up liquidity, you can increase the velocity with velocity, it's all sorts of it is the 1984 Orwellian nightmare that they are ushering in. And they're doing it in the name of becoming crypto capital of the world. When really, to me, this is just ushering in the artificial intelligence, social credit score, digital monetary system. It's all we have never moved closer and closer and closer to what Larry Fink and the World Economic Forum always wanted. There's a slight nuance and subtlety in that the reason you're getting these competing narratives, like look how woke and socialist Europe is, is becoming this central bank digital currency, control grid, digital ID. So what America gets to do is, because Europe, all of Europe, all of UK, even Israel, people think Israel rules the world. Israel's vassalized into the same network. They're mainly aligned with the military-industrial complex. But when finance wants to take over, they will financialize Netanyahu, privatize many of the assets, and that's the role of UAE.
I have to interrupt. I saw your post about privatizing the nuclear arsenal.
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Israel. I'd never thought about that. And I was, I don't know enough, I don't have enough background to know what the evidence is, but I thought that was very intriguing. And because I do believe the financial complex is more powerful than Israel. So,
Absolutely. Look, to me, Israel is weaponizing religion. So you use the history of Judaism in order to recruit an army that then work for the military industrial complex, destabilization campaigns, ethnic cleansing. You have all the technology that you can do that would never be allowed within America. Then you have the covert operations to create the militia groups that you think are the Islamist terrorists, but work for intelligence at and obviously have been radicalized from all the wars that were created as a result. And then you have the narratives that are pushed back into the evangelical Christian, more modern interpretations of prophets versus country, and evangelical Christians believing that they need to protect the country. And so you've weaponized Christianity, you've weaponized Islam, you've weaponized Judaism, and that is how the military make a lot of money out of the region. Now, in the meantime, people have the narrative saying, but Israel's, all of the narrative has shifted, where they're like, what is Israel doing for us? Well, it was a money laundering mechanism
right.
for taking Pentagon budgets, and then the money always went up to the US stock market in the end. And, through Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, JP Morgan, and all these different companies, and Boeing and Palantir now. And so if you look at it, people are like, yeah, but we spent 400 billion on Israel, but you made $10 trillion of revenue into the stock market. But that's not for the benefit of the Americans. So the Americans are like, oh yeah, but they're just extractive. They've co-opted everything. To me, Mossad, CIA, that's one network.
Right.
They work for mainly military and corporate interest. And you have this really nice plausible deniability story where you can say it wasn't us that did the genocide, it was them. It wasn't, they controlled, they blackmailed us. That's the only reason why we did it. It wasn't because military paid us. It wasn't, it was because they Epsteined us.
Uh-huh.
It's just you create this plausible deniability that when America needs to divorce from Israel, they can even, and if you look at the algorithms right now on X, you could go to X right now, and depending on what side of the algorithm you're on, you'll have a space with agents that are saying how Qatar rules the world and it's all the Islamist terrorists. And then you'll have another space with, and I don't like to use the word anti-Semitic because Palestinians are Semitic. I like to say Jew haters. There is a revival of that Nazi narrative of people that will spend the whole day saying how every problem in the world is because of Jews. And you can have those two algorithms are going to be pushed at the same time as having these civil unrest campaigns.
Yeah, but part of it is that there's something about the human race we want a scapegoat. And I remember when I first left the establishment, I got on a listserv and there was a huge war going on. It was for researchers researching the narcotics trafficking. And you had one group that said it's all the Jews, and another group that said it's all the Vatican, and the other group that says it's all the Masons. And, I had to explain to them, if you look at how those groups interact within a place, so a city in America, they they compete and cooperate. They have to, otherwise you can't, they have to do it together. And if you look at who's doing it, it's all of us. If you look at who's going to work and doing it, or who's financing it in their 401k, in other words, it's a much more integrated model, and but there's this need to find this scapegoat of somebody way over there. I'll never forget one guy was trying to lobby me to cover or promote climate change on Solari, which I wouldn't do. And he kept insisting that the spraying was being done by the Chinese, and the American military was helpless to stop it. I was like, wait a minute. You're saying the Chinese are spraying over Omaha, Nebraska, but the American military can do nothing. It was quite
Yeah,
extraordinary.
You got it. So, it's the communists, it's the radical left, it's the Democrats, it's the Republicans, it's the capitalists, it's the Muslims, it's the Jews, it's the, those are very deliberate, where your worldview turns into the algorithm and it radicalizes you further and further into that. And then suddenly you can find all the evidence around the history of banking and the Jewish connection. But again, even if you look at that, that was because historically, usury was forbidden within Christianity.
Right.
In Judaism, you couldn't lend at usurious rates to each other, but you could lend to non-Jews. And so the Jews, created the banking system for people that we call Christians. I don't like to use these labels, but
right.
Christian aligned power. And then they became powerful.
Right.
But, this scapegoat mechanism has always been a very useful tool.
Right.
And you got to see above it. And it's very, very difficult to see above it. But you have to, because it's very easy to go down that conspiratorial route and find all the evidence that backs up your belief that every problem in the world is because of Zionist Jews. But where does the money go back? And the money tells you the truth.
What is narrative warfare in information operations? Imagine stories so powerful they can shape how entire populations see a conflict or a country. That's what narrative warfare is all about. It's a way to influence opinions and beliefs using carefully crafted stories and messages. It's a key part of information operations, which aim to control what people think and feel about a situation. Instead of just using facts and figures, narrative warfare uses stories that stick in the mind because humans naturally remember stories better than raw data. Throughout history, nations have used this tactic to justify military actions, sway public opinion, and even scare opponents. For example, governments create stories that make their side look like heroes or victims, while painting the enemy as villains. These stories are shared through media, social networks, and official statements. The goal is to create a perception that supports their strategic goals. Narrative warfare also influences how the world views a conflict. By framing events in a certain way, a country can make its actions seem justified or moral. It can highlight contradictions in an adversary's behavior, making them seem untrustworthy or aggressive. This can weaken their legitimacy without any physical fighting. Another important aspect is psychological impact. When a narrative is convincing enough, it can generate fear or doubt among the enemy's population. By spreading stories about military strength or potential threats, an adversary can create uncertainty and pressure without firing a single shot. This kind of influence can be very effective in shaping the outcome of conflicts. In modern warfare, controlling the narrative has become just as important as controlling territory. It's a way to win battles in the minds of people, both at home and abroad. This shift from traditional combat to information and psychological tactics shows how powerful stories can be in shaping the course of history. So, narrative warfare is really about using stories as a strategic tool to influence perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors on a large scale.
Where does it actually end up? Who does it enrich in the end?
Right. It's a much more granular story. Okay, so let me keep going.
Oh, I wanted to go back to stablecoins for that because I went on this tangent. But in America is fully privatized. So the corporate interest controls the government, the lobbies.
Right.
But in Europe, the European Central Bank, the European Union, these were Bank for International Settlement projects. And so Europe and Australia and Canada, they're completely vassalized. And so you get to have the narrative of a command and control socialist, communist type of. So America, J.D. Vance gets to say, see, look at these crazy, radical, leftist, socialist, wokeist, transgender, all that LGBTQ stuff, climate change warriors. We're the capitalists. They're the communists. Look what's happening to their country. But it's all going up to the same structure. So in Europe, we'll have a central bank digital currency. In UK, we'll have a central bank digital currency. But the narrative is that we're going to do it the right way. We're the capitalists. We get a stable coin. And so even though the whole European economy goes right up to the US stock market via NATO and all of these euro dollar schemes. The narrative will be, we're the crypto capital of the world, we're the capitalists, and they're the crazy communists. Look why they're going down.
Here's what I see. Instead of the New York Fed issuing the CBDC, the companies that own the New York Fed are going to issue the CBDC, and that gives you 1 degree of separation protection from Congress and the people's elected representatives. So it's a much more potentially dangerous system than even a CBDC. I mean, a CBDC issued by the New York Fed is subject to public policy considerations and disclosure powers that one, issued by its owners is not subject to.
Yeah, you've nailed it. And then you go back in history and you look at who's going to be the net beneficiary. Well, JP Morgan's going to be an important node for a covert central bank digital currency that sucks up everything, as is America. America is there to suck up all into the corporate interest and the stock price. And so by having the privatization narrative, you've got a technocratic corptocracy ruled by, because and constitutionally that was the setup of America, if you think about it.
But here's what they want to do. What you're trying to do with programmable money and a digital ID and then the surveillance network, which we got to talk about, what you're trying to do is the bankers assumed control of monetary policy in the United States in 1913. Now you are going to assume complete control of fiscal policy. I mean, once this system is in place, you don't need a legislature. You don't need an executive branch. Now, you may keep them for theater. You may keep them for show, but the bankers control fiscal policy entirely.
I love this conversation. We agree on so many different things. So they got control of monetary policy because who are the shareholders of the Fed is the private banks. The private banks, they put a laxy there called the chairman of the Federal Reserve and the governor that implement the bank's policy. And then you have Treasury. Treasury is a piggy bank for reallocating those money through the debt markets and capital markets into the same privatized interest. The asset managers own all the assets. You pay your pension. They get all the board seats through index investing, your insurance premiums, all your social systems, the insurers, all of that goes up into the money managers. They then use that in order to control companies, construct financial products. Mm-hmm. You have that whole thing. But now you've got a beautiful narrative right now, which is Trump, the guy that they tried to assassinate, the guy they tried to use all the lawfare on, the one that actually got through to take on the deep state. He's the one that's going to use fiscal dominance, remove all power from the banks, hand it over to Treasury. When it's an identical system, you've now got the same people issuing the stable coins. And so all you're doing is you're getting fiscal, you're controlling Treasury, you're controlling Fed, you've got Senate, you've got Congress through lobby, and then the deep state has judicial. You have centralized everything, but you got the perfect, like Trump was just so perfect for taking almost like his cult following.
It was 6 weeks before Butler on Money and Markets. So John Titus and I do a show on the Solari Report every week called Money and Markets. 6 weeks before Butler, I said, they have chosen Trump. They're putting Trump in to get the control grid. That's his job, and that's what he's going to do.
You can follow his funding. If you look at his funding, his largest backer was Elon Musk, technical industrial complex. Then you had the Mellon banking family, financial industrial complex. Further down, you had Mariam Adelson, which was the Israel part. So try and get as much in the Greater Israel project while we move to regional stability for the banks so we can implement the technology. And so he is a perfect reflection. And so when you get all these kind of Epstein email leaks, I think what this is that if you look at Biden, he was a neocon. So he was more aligned with military than financial.
Yes.
Whereas Trump is pure financial. He's got the narrative of we're taking on the banks, but he's a transactional guy.
Right.
And he's definitely ushering in the vision of BlackRock and the technical financial complex there,
Right.
which I believe right now in some places is in conflict. So most of the time they're aligned.
Well, here's the tension. I mean, basically, the tech guys have said, we can help you extend and evolve. So you want to do a going direct reset. And in fact, so every 80 to 120 years, the central bankers do a reset and they evolve or shift the currency. This time, in essence, they're going to end currency. I mean, that's what programmable money is. There's no liquidity. Essentially, you're ending currency as we know it. And so the tech bros are coming in and saying, we can do this with you. And traditionally, Silicon Valley and the finance guys, that's not a happy cultural merger there. And so they have a lot to work out if this is really going to happen.
Yeah, and then you've got the traditional, historically, the military has been more nationalistic. But, that kind of is the roots of the military industrial complex, was really the roots of the post-World War II Bretton Woods order with the manufacturing base in America. Obviously, that's all gone to China now. But that was the roots of the nationalistic faction of power. What's good for Boeing is good for America. What's good for General Motors is good for America type of thing. But now they're saying, right, well, finance wants to do this global BRICS, GCC, multipolar world, regional blocks thing. We don't really want to end the forever war. So Netanyahu was kind of our guy at military. He was privatizing. He was doing all of our military operations. And so, what's in it for him? What's he going to get? What's his negotiation? And the military basically, I think, have said, well, we'll compensate you if we make Middle East into regional stability. We now don't control that side of the world. That's China's territory. That's BRICS.
Right.
That's GCC. That's regional. None of them compete with American power on their own, but together they do. And so they all went into blocks. They all aligned. And then they said, well, we'll give you Europe. Like, you get Russia-Ukraine war. You get trillions of dollars printed from the European Central Bank. You get Bank of England money. You get NATO pushing up their budgets to 5%. You can come back and do the Banana Republic with the Central and Latin America again.
So here's the question: what is their plan in the Ukraine? Because it looks to me like no one's given up on the idea that ultimately they can implode Russia. I don't think they can. So they've lost. But they seem to think that they can keep it going forever.
I don't think that there was ever a Russia-Ukraine war. I think there was a
clearance.
CIA financial industrial complex, military industrial complex war on Europe to vassalize Europe.
Correct. I totally agree.
Yeah, and then split Russia closer to China for the BRICS vision.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, when you put on the sanctions, all you managed to do is shift an enormous amount of low-cost energy out of Europe into China. Big win for China.
Yeah, absolutely. And Europe essentially had, the ESG narrative, the climate change narrative, invest trillions of dollars into renewable energy. But Europe was propped up by big Germany. Germany was a manufacturing base. That manufacturing base required Russian cheap gas. When you break that, you break Europe. And that's exactly what we saw. At the same time as fracking, America becoming energy independent and becoming a net exporter of energy. So you blow up Nord Stream pipeline, you expand NATO, you do a colored revolution in Ukraine, you then go to Zelensky, and then you have an operation to agitate Russia, which pushes Russia to China, vassalizes Europe, and then we use the last Ukrainian in a proxy war. And in the end, BlackRock maybe owns all of the grain fields, the land, the reconstruction contracts in the portfolio. And Russia
so it is a clearance. It is a clearance.
Yeah.
Right.
We get to use the UK to collateralize their country. The Gulf countries get to buy up more and more assets.
Right.
The financial industrial complex gets a place for more of its data centers, energy, for artificial intelligence, water supply, rare earth minerals. And America knew all along that there is no such thing as a war between America and China. That doesn't exist. That breaks everything. It breaks, there is no model that
Well, it's like
exists
a
in this world.
Siamese twins having a war.
Yeah,
How do Siamese twins have a war?
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So, you reset the world order. And look, I'm not saying that what I've learned about factions of power is people like to move towards a conspiracy theory of an organized cabal. I think it's more decentralized than that. I think they get their operations wrong all the time, and they are in power struggles. And it's basically determined by your access to choke points and wealth. And so wealth changes. And so sometimes, with the rise of India, you've noticed that Hindu affiliated wealth has risen. So you've got more factions of Indian power in the network. With the rise of the Gulf countries, you've got, Muslim affiliated wealth. That's been a growing trend. With the rise of China, you've had atheist affiliated wealth, which has grown significantly. And so over time, you can essentially own the West by doing a deal with BlackRock and buying their shares. Then you own the West.
But I think, I think the way things work. So the chairman of our firm when I was on Wall Street, so the partners would come in on, we'd have a day right after January 1st. The partners would come in and the chairman would walk in and say, let me tell you what's going to happen this year. In other words, they had plans, but the reality is life is fluid. Plans don't always work. And so within those, say they set strategic goals and then things change and happen and it's fluid. So there's a lot, but there's a lot of planning. I mean, the plans are, you got a 10-year plan, a 5-year plan, a 1-year plan. It's very planned out but it's also within those plans, it's very fluid and they don't always work. So
I completely agree, and they hedge. They have a plan for every outcome. So if there probably would have been a plan for what happens if Ukraine could actually take out Russia. There would have been a plan for that. It didn't work that way, and they probably knew it wouldn't work that way. But they've got their derivatives, they've got their hedge funds, they can hedge different bets. They've got their vassalization strategy. They've got the key resources that they're looking at, and they've got a plan for what happens if we go to multipolarity. So it's all hedged.
One of the things that really argues for what you're saying is Russia is the first time I've seen the West's hybrid warfare not work, and yet their central bank was pretty loyal to the West. And if you look at why and how the hybrid warfare didn't work, it looks to me like Putin had a lot of help from the West. So there were factions in the West that were helpful. And so, and that argues that they wanted a multipolar world.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And if you look at the history of Putin, obviously you had the fall of the Soviet Union. And then you had the oligarchs that were looking to financialize, securitize, privatize all of the resources. And Putin was the resistance against that. He took on some of the oligarchs and some of the power and nationalized many of the resources. And so within Russia, although of course there's propaganda, we'll never know the truth. But within Russia, there is a very populist movement around what he did for Russia. And while we may be led to believe that this is just some tyrant, and of course there are. I mean, this is there is corruption in everything, and there is power struggles, and there is different networks and all these different factions of power. But really, his thing was that he didn't allow for the nationalization of all the assets, and he took on the oligarchical power. And so, from that moment, when you couldn't get neoliberalism, within Russia, which was kind of a Bolshevik revolution and led to the creation of the Soviet Union in the first place, by Wall Street funding both Hitler, fascism, creating the Federal Reserve, and also the Soviet Union for your communism. You fund all ideologies. He was a resistance against that. And so you can imagine in that there was lots of negotiations with the financial industrial complex that also has power within Russia, and there's a whole structure within Western power versus sovereign power.
So let me ask you one question before we move on, or actually two questions. The UAE transfer on Enbridge, do you think that is, maybe it's just a symbol, but do you think that was an important transaction?
On Enbridge,
No, on the BRICS separate system. It was a
right.
digital transfer to China, but
Yeah.
it did use the Enbridge system.
Yeah. I do. So there's there's a few currency war apparatus that have been set up on this stage. Firstly, the BRICS single currency, I believe, was a Goldman Sachs operation to try and turn BRICS into Europe. And I think they realized that and avoided doing a single currency because it's a vassalization strategy.
Right.
So I don't think we get the BRICS single currency, but they have all been building their own payment rails. Now, UAE is kind of an interesting one because within the Gulf countries, they pay good cop, bad cop.
Right.
Saudi is, I believe, the most important powerful player.
Right.
But then UAE is UAE, for example, can buy Israeli stocks. Saudi can't buy Israeli stocks. And so UAE is kind of a way of eventually buying Israel when you want to put in a Gulf country cabinet that's no longer aligned with military operations, but is actually aligned with finance and GCC stability. And so UAE, I think, is an important node in that structure. But via Hong Kong and the Bank for International Settlement projects, they created this network of central bank digital currencies. And you've had these different beta tests through Enbridge and stuff. I haven't seen anything substantial yet.
Okay.
But the creation of these alternative payment rails, India's been the most successful at liberating themselves through payment rails. And China's created this, this crazy network of how to circumvent sanctions and allow for barter trades to happen via, China's essentially piggy bank of you can buy our goods, you get access to credit here, and all of the different mafia networks that allow for the oil trades to all continue. Sanctions is no longer a viable thing.
Right, absolutely. So Russia, Moscow started or the Bank of Russia put a office in Beijing in 2017 so they could settle in gold. Now I don't know how much they've been settling in gold, but that capacity and all the different swap lines are there. So they've been doing many things to trade direct and or settle in gold or their own currencies for a long time.
Yeah.
And it shows you how long and hard it is to build that. But that capacity is, it's over the hump. It's past the tipping point.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we saw I see the remnants of the last operations. I think the Pakistani and Indian conflict, was kind of you've got China, you've got historical IMF power that is now deep into the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. And the financial industrial complex want to penetrate the regional blocks as much as possible in this negotiation to multipolarity. And so India was the main penetration for BRICS. UAE was the main penetration for GCC. But at the same time, and that's a lot of what we're seeing, all of these negotiations and trades, happening right now. And then, there is the alliance between Iran, Russia, and China was the end of sanctions, and that's why we're seeing countries like Syria, where you have the ex-head of ISIS in the White House negotiating with Trump, and that can only happen when you understand that these people were never religious Islamist terrorist ideologues. They were pay-for-play rental militias to destabilize countries, and that's what you're seeing across Africa right now. So what I see with Trump is you see an announcement that comes from Truth Social that says like, the Muslims, the Islamist terrorists are killing Christians in Nigeria. What that actually means is it's a signal out there to say to Nigeria, go east, start negotiating with BRICS. Because we can no longer actually do these covert operations. And what we want you to do is we're going to stop these funding of these destabilization campaigns, but only once you do a deal with the financial complex on regional stability and resources. But once you're done, then work with China and work in multipolarity. But it's a signal to the world. It's saying there's a white genocide in South Africa. He's saying America is no longer a reliable trading partner. We're weakening the dollar. We're deconstructing, and even the deep state. We're taking on the deep state. What does that mean? It means that you're taking down USAID, which propped up the dollar. That was the covert operations that forced everyone into slavery.
I think USAID was basically you go into a country and you buy people.
Yes.
You buy a lot of people, you make up all these crazy things and you use it to buy people. Now they don't need soft power, they've got hard power. So if you look at the surveillance technology, the satellites and other invisible weaponry they're rolling out, I think they think that hard power is cheaper and easier than soft power.
Yeah. So look, we're going to end into this regional block, multipolar world. The more and more I watch, the more I think the thesis is correct. And I'm almost certain this isn't the West being defeated by the rising BRICS. This is BRICS working with the financial industrial complex. So the Western banks and financial institutions are not fighting. They're making this happen.
The West financed China. The West financed the BRICS. This is all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, and then you end up with, what is the next phase? So we move into blocks, and we've got this massive amount of investment into AI data centers, surveillance technology, real world assets, tokenize everything, financialize, securitize everything. And then you have sovereign countries that don't have Western central banks. They have resource-backed currencies, and they are able to, but what are they doing? They're saying, say Saudi, for example, it has essentially its own resources. It has a population that aren't taxed much, and it has a currency pegged to the dollar, but it has its own central bank. What are they going to do? Well, they're saying, we just want the data centers here. And so they'll say, we'll invest $1 trillion, which is reverse IMF, decolonization, essentially, of the region. And saying, NVIDIA build here, and everyone's fighting for the data based upon how much sovereign wealth they have. But in the end, it is this technical industrial complex that's propped up by the financial industrial complex.
Right.
And if you think about what military is, more and more of the contracts are cybersecurity, cyber warfare, artificial intelligence.
Right. And I have to throw in weather warfare. The Iranians just announced they may have to evacuate Tehran because they're out of water.
Yeah. I haven't been down that rabbit hole, so I'll start going through there. But clearly, there's all these, pray to Allah for the drought to end. And you can't have data centers if you've got nuclear energy, which is what the main thing is. When you're moving from narratives for the military industrial complex to narratives for the financial industrial complex, you switch from nuclear bombs to nuclear power.
Right.
This is an energy play.
Right.
And if Iran, to me, is totally on board with this vision, this regional vision.
Right.
They're not, they have to maintain their narrative as a resistance against Western, but at the highest level of power, and I do mean Khomeini, it's pragmatic.
Right.
It's completely pragmatic.
Right.
They're going to get the removal of their sanctions. They're going to be able to use nuclear power. Obviously, they, they leveraged the funding of proxies in order to get more power in this negotiation. They became the boogeyman, when really, if you look at groups like Hamas, they weren't funded by Iran for the last decade. That was funded via Qatar. Qatar
Right.
is the largest ally of US in the Gulf country, including UAE and Qatar. They compete.
I think I mentioned it. Witkoff let it slip on. He was being interviewed with Kushner, and he let it slip that the master redevelopment plan has been in place for 2 years.
Oops.
And Kushner almost fell off his chair because he's like, "Shut up, shut up."
Yeah.
You could see he looked very distressed. It takes a couple years to build a master development plan of
Yes.
that size, but it means they had it in time to figure out where the bombing would clear. In other words, the bombing gets designed to clear as opposed to have a war.
Yeah.
And so, somebody had to finance Hamas. And it's always been amazing to me that anybody believes the official narrative, because if you look at if you look at what it takes to operationalize a military with tunnels and weapons for year after year after year, that's a lot of money. And if you understand the financial pipes, you know that no money can get through unless somebody wants it to get through.
Yeah, exactly. This is the most surveilled, or like technical industrial complex nightmare in terms of surveillance in Gaza, with the most sophisticated and illegal intelligence agencies, Mossad, which are 100% aligned with factions of CIA. We're led to believe that, that massive, vast tunnel network and that operation on October the 7th, which was so radically different in the media to what actually happened, that we're led to believe that, if you believe that, then there's a sand guy in a cave in Afghanistan that took down those twin towers.
It just so the last thing I want to go before I turn to Bitcoin is Ripple, XRP and Ripple. What do you think their role is intended to be?
Yeah, so I invested in Ripple Labs, the company, in the real early days before like in the fintech days. Ripple Labs is, so the token was created by the same person that created Mt. Gox, which was the exchange that got hacked in 2014.
Right.
And was sold to Mark Capellas, which was the front guy to take the blame. But he actually bought an exchange that was missing 80,000 Bitcoin. And Jeb McCaleb, the guy that created the XRP token, also created, Mt. Gox and Stellar and other cryptos as well. So he's like a serial tinkerer. But there was a bunch of banking technology that's got nothing to do with the token, that was trying to create competition to Swift. And they ended up with 60% of all of those tokens on the balance sheet of the company. And you had investments in XRP from like Matthew Mellon, who sadly passed away, and like from the Mellon banking family that put millions and millions into these tokens. And they were just selling these tokens to all the different banks, and then they classify that as revenue. And so they've now got like this multi-billion dollar, $40 billion valued company that has a bunch of tokens, which is deeply centralized. But then they're building out these different stablecoin rails. And, it's by, trying to work with the banking establishment. I think an early operation in order to try and, get some of these competing projects. And I haven't found anything too sinister, but it's kind of this bridge between a banking psyop pretending to be a cryptocurrency in the decentralized world.
The story you're about to hear isn't about crypto, it's about power. The kind of power that doesn't win elections, it decides them. The kind of power that doesn't follow markets, it makes them. And at the center of this power sits one man, Peter Thiel. Thiel isn't just a billionaire, he's the deep state's technologist, a Stanford-bred intelligence asset whose companies power the surveillance architecture of the modern world, a CIA partner, an FBI informant, the architect behind Palantir, the data harvesting machine used by the entire Five Eyes alliance, and Israel. Thiel has the eyes. Elon Musk, his oldest co-conspirator, has the vehicle. And together, they've been building the rails for a new digital order.
When I co-founded a technology startup, our goal was nothing less than to replace the US dollar by creating a new digital currency.
This doesn't start with crypto, it started with PayPal. Thiel and Musk's original vision wasn't a payments app, it was a plan to digitize the entire global financial system. They failed, but their dream never died.
Essentially, if done right, X would become, I don't know, maybe half of the global financial system.
Thiel calls this era the Straussian moment, a Pax Americana enforced not with soldiers, but with surveillance. And while they build rockets, social networks, and spyware, they quietly began funding the companies that would rebuild the monetary system from the ground up. And one of those companies is Ripple. In 2013, Thiel's founder fund became a seed investor in Ripple, the plumbing for the coming digital financial system. Thiel had the intelligence rails, Musk had the communication rails, Ripple would become the payment rails. And it didn't stop there. In 2012, a year before that seed deal, Brad Garlinghouse was invited to Peter Thiel's secret tech conference, Dialogue. It's essentially the Tech Bilderberg Group, a secret gathering of 10 to 12 elites from government, military, and tech. 3 years later, Brad becomes CEO of Ripple. Coincidence? Maybe, but it shows something undeniable. Ripple's leadership has been swimming in the same waters as the architects of the new digital world since the beginning. And now, Thiel's political machine has moved into position. His protege, J.D. Vance, now sits in the White House. Vance says Thiel's lecture at Yale was the most significant moment of his life. Thiel made Vance. Vance is pro-crypto, and Ripple donated $50 million to Fairshake, the largest pro-Trump crypto PAC of the 2024 cycle. If everything goes to plan, Thiel's network has a 12-year runway to reshape the global system. Trump 24, Vance 28, Vance 32, and Ripple perfectly positioned to be the core infrastructure of that system. And now, fresh revelations. Documents show Peter Thiel in Epstein's network, from private dinners to funding corridors to intelligence-linked operations, another thread connecting the same elite circles that silently build global systems behind closed doors. We've recently seen the ideological pivot. For over a decade, Thiel, Tucker Carlson, Roger Ver all sold Bitcoin as the path to freedom. Now, every one of them suddenly declares Bitcoin compromised, infiltrated, co-opted by intelligence agencies. A narrative shift so abrupt, it reveals the truth. Bitcoin was the diversion. Ripple and compliant digital assets were the destination. Now, Thiel built the eyes, Musk built the network, Ripple built the rails, and together they form the backbone of the digital order rising beneath our feet. This is no longer about markets. This is about who will control the next system. And the evidence suggests very clearly that Ripple was chosen long ago.
My impression is they were trying to simply create an alternative settlement system for the banks.
Yes.
So,
and it didn't need the token.
Right.
And so they funded the whole thing on the token and created this whole model of, and now they're using the value of their token on the company balance sheet to acquire real businesses.
Right.
You know, custody business, settling, clearing businesses. And
right.
So they created this model of how to have a token on a balance sheet that you can then use to acquire these different plumbing within the banking side.
Right.
But I haven't seen them do anything real yet.
Yeah, it's really token as IPO, right?
Yes.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, you sell a token. And this is an important part about clarity, by the way, which before we go on to the next slide, which is the battle between CFTC and SEC is really important because if these tokens are securities, then you have the accredited investor rules and you have 1 year lock-in before they can trade, which is the rules of securities. If you are a commodity, then it's retail investor with no lock-in. You can trade straight away. So you can launch a token and have a multi-billion-dollar market before even creating any value.
Right.
And you can sell that to retail.
Right. And there is one exemption for 75 million or less for a year. And so to me, the one of the attractions has always been, is it possible to do an IPO essentially without all the heavy litigation and legal risk that comes with it?
Yeah, there was over time there was a relaxation of the Reg D accredited investor exemptions. They created something called the Jobs Act,
Right.
which created two new forms of regulations: Regulation CF, Regulation A, and Regulation A plus. And essentially, they were watered down IPOs, but they're still pretty sophisticated operations.
It's too complicated. It's too
Yeah.
expensive. It's too, and tokens was potentially a way around that. Well, let's see what comes out.
Yeah.
But one of the things that would be very interesting, we keep getting members of the administration saying the economy in 2026 is going to be fantastic. And meantime, you're seeing delinquencies all across the credit scale. So auto loans, student debt, mortgages, everything. It looks like the middle class economy is in a complete meltdown. But meantime, the Trump administration keeps saying it's going to be wonderful. It's going to be wonderful. And I keep thinking, what are they talking about? And I'm wondering if they get the Clarity Act and then literally try and let Main Street raise money with tokens.
Yeah, no, sadly, I'm a bit more skeptical and sinister of that. I think that the financial industrial complex are in charge.
Right.
They're doing civil unrest campaigns. They're trying to asset strip the entire collective West. And they're going to give everyone else a universal basic income and a surveillance state. They want a revolution because they would use that like a 9/11 operation for Patriot Act 2.0 and whatever they want to do on the more extreme of what doesn't get in Clarity or Genius.
That's exactly what I see. So
yeah.
I'm with you. I'm
really sad for the people that kind of believe what Trump is selling. And please don't take this as Trump derangement syndrome. I also have Biden derangement syndrome and Clinton derangement syndrome and Keir Starmer derangement syndrome. I just see them as all part of the same control grid with a different narrative. And the big sad thing about Trump is he does have a cult following that thinks that there is a plan that should be trusted and he's going to make America great again. And that tariffs are about rebuilding the manufacturing base and putting jobs back. I see robotics. I see artificial intelligence.
Right.
I see a great stock market, but I see severe wealth inequality, and every metric of what makes a functioning economy and a functioning society is getting worse and worse and worse.
So I remember being told at one point, we're going to ship all the manufacturing to China. They will get all the pollution because if we keep it here, way too much pollution. They'll get the pollution. In the meantime, we bust the unions. Then we bring back the manufacturing and it's all automated.
Yeah.
And that was, that was a discussion I had in 2008.
Yeah. And it's really sad because we are at extreme highs in stock market, an extreme K-shaped economy. Like the level of indebtedness is it's hit breaking point. Like the rich and poor versus rich is like it's just reaching that point right now where if you're dependent upon a government, they're not going to look after you. There is no plan.
Right.
And you have to look after yourself.
Well, I would say the opposite. If you look at America's being poisoned.
Yes.
They're just the life expectancy is being intentionally lowered across the board. And there's no doubt about it. So, you're in a war. And what's interesting is I just came from 2.5 months of traveling around and doing meet and greets with our subscribers. And what's incredible is the people who faced that war 10 years ago and have been taking evasive action ever since are doing really, really well.
Yes.
I look at you and I would say you're doing really, really well. But you faced the music in 2006 and then have been, trying to find, successful evasive action ever since. Is that a fair description?
I would absolutely say that. So it takes a long time to prepare. It really does. Like
Right. It
when I
does.
realized how immoral the financial system is, I left in 2006. When I realized what the UK was going to be, I left in 2015, and I've been preparing ever since.
Now, where are you now, Simon?
I live on a little island called the Isle of Man. And
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah.
I picked this island. Bitcoin blessed me. I could go where I need to go, but there was one thing unique about the Isle of Man: is it is illegal for the government to borrow money.
See this island? Right in between Great Britain and Ireland. So what if I told you it's neither part of the UK or Ireland, and not even officially a country? So what is it really? This is Isle of Man, a place with no army, but a flag that looks like this. And here's where it gets even weirder. The Isle of Man is what's called a crown dependency. It makes its own laws, has its own parliament, and even speaks its own endangered language. But when it comes to defense or diplomacy, that's still handled by the UK. Now, here's something interesting. It also has zero corporate tax, which means online gambling empires, shipping firms, and crypto companies love it here. Oh, and once a year, this quiet island turns into a real-life racetrack. It hosts the Isle of Man TT. It's tiny, quiet, quirky, and somehow one of the richest islands on Earth.
And so as a consequence of that, while we are kind of dependent for energy from the United Kingdom, we're in the Irish Sea. The community spirit on the island is an actual community where even if, we have something called a tax cap here. And so you have basically a subscription to the island, if you want to think of it like that. And it's a contribution to the community. We only have 4 people in prison.
Wow.
In the entire island. The front page newspaper is somebody ran over a chicken and didn't stop and tell the police or something like that. That's as far as it gets, because it's still got that community spirit. And to me, it was amazing to see that that actually a lot of the degeneracy that we see in society, the urban decay, the lack of investment in infrastructure, is actually because of debt. And it just really highlights to me that the government, when they take on that debt, they become a tool for somebody else's agenda. And
one of my favorite books is The History of Central Banking by a South African. And one of the things he points out is as soon any society that legalizes usury, it is simply a matter of time before they fail.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great book. I think it was Mark Goodwin, The History of Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind.
No, this one was Steve Goodson. Yeah.
Steve Goodson? Sorry if I got the name wrong.
Yeah, good. Mark Goodwin is doing a series on Solari called Digital Assets, Digital Currency.
Interesting.
So he wrote a Bitcoin book, not as early, but he used to be editor of Bitcoin magazine.
Ah, interesting.
Okay, so let's turn to Bitcoin. So one of the things, so you and I have a different take on Bitcoin, but I believe at a minimum that the financial guys want to use it to reset the system, and I expect the price to go up a lot more. So I think for some period of time, while the limit's on, it's a speculative asset, but it's a pretty easy bet that they're going to try and run it up a fair amount. Where you and I disagree is I think they can pull the limit anytime they want to.
As in increase it from 21 million.
Right. And not just through ETFs, or the games they can play in the if they securitize it. I think they can literally change the limit on Bitcoin anytime they want.
Yeah, got it.
So, yeah. And so one of the things, let's say somebody's in your position, they've done well, they own Bitcoin related businesses. That means you've always got to be managing it so that you're making sure you're taking your profits and investing in real assets, and you have plenty of real assets if that should happen. And what's interesting is Mark thinks they're going to take it up and hold it there. I think they're going to take it up and pull it back down. So it'll be a pump and dump, I mean, it pumps and dumps as it goes, but ultimately there'll be a dump after the whales get out. Mark thinks no, they're going to keep it there just to capitalize the system, but I don't think we know. And I have to tell you, I think they make it up as they go. So there's no way to know.
Yeah, so absolutely. So what do we know about Bitcoin? There is only 21 million Bitcoin, but there certainly is a lot more paper Bitcoin.
Right.
And they've built up the Bitcoin derivative complex. You are seeing it in real effect right now. So in my opinion, people get confused because when I talk about these things, people get upset because there's this celebrity worship, godlike characters within the Bitcoin ecosystem. And one of those is Michael Saylor. Michael Saylor is, I try to tell people that it's not a personality attack. He created the best pitch for Bitcoin in order to centralize as much Bitcoin as possible. And get people to borrow against their Bitcoin because he created the narrative that the dollar is being devalued, Bitcoin's going up, so put your Bitcoin in custody, borrow against it, and attack the system.
Right. So I have to tell you, I've listened to a lot of your description of Saylor, and you have it totally nailed. I mean, you understand exactly what's happening, why it's happening, how it happens, and the fact that he's completely under the control of the finance guys.
Yes.
They've got him by the short hairs.
And there's no exceptions to that rule because I know how these financial industrial complexes are built from working in investment banking and from studying it on the outside as well, and from creating a business where you're drugged into Silicon Valley money, and you get all these gateway drugs, and then if you have enough compliance, you end up a public company, and then if you have enough compliance as a public company, you get to borrow against your stock, and then if you borrow enough against your stock, you end up in an index fund, and if you end up in an index fund, you get passive income,
right?
And then you're fully vassalized at that point, where if you don't comply, they can knock you out of the index. And they have creeped through strategy. There was a shell, a public company, and then it created, okay, we'll sell more stock in order to buy more Bitcoin. And then slowly you get these different types of products being built. Slowly you get, I'll buy more Bitcoin and I'll borrow it from all these corporate bond investors. So now you've got the dollar vigilantes. You also have a new product which monetizes volatility. So now you've got Jane Street in and the hedge funds in.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got a new product that gives a higher yield, higher risk dividend. And so now you've got the mutual fund investors in. So now you've got, and then we'll get into the NASDAQ 100. So now you've got BlackRock and now you've got Vanguard. And so now as you progress, you've got all the different players. You've got the derivatives complex. You've got the Cantor Fitzgeralds that are bringing in all the other Bitcoin companies. Say, hey, Jack Mallers, why don't you tell everyone that you're going to create a Bitcoin treasury company? Hey, David Bailey, you control some Bitcoin media. You're the Bitcoin magazine guy. Why don't you create a Bitcoin company? Hey, Adam Back, you're in Canada, right? Here's a tax efficient structure so that you can roll 30,000 Bitcoin into a treasury company and then borrow against it for your other company, Blockstream and stuff. And it's very tempting for these different financial weapons of mass destruction that they've created.
Right.
But now they've built the whole complex to control the short-term price of Bitcoin, and manipulate people into borrowing against their Bitcoin so that they can all be margin called. Issue stable coins backed by treasuries that will subsidize these lower rates. And you've got these Cantor Fitzgeralds that are just bringing more and more people into centralizing Bitcoin. And at the center of the whole thing, you've got strategy, which is a beautiful narrative of saying JP Morgan knocks you out of the index. Jack Mallers, you'll now lose your banking at JP Morgan. So you put a certificate up showing that you've lost your banking service. And now suddenly we can do buy strategy crash JP Morgan operation. And then Jack Mallers just launched his borrow against your Bitcoin service. And so now everyone can lever up and borrow at the price at the bottom. Say, hey, when's the best time to get out a Bitcoin-backed loan at the bottom of the market? So now let's do a short squeeze and take on JP Morgan. We're taking down the banks, and meanwhile, you have vassalized the entire strategy into the financial industrial complex, and all of these different constructs have been built.
I used to call them the boys. One of the things the boys love to do is if you won't back them, if you won't finance them, they create all these different ways of taking you down that, here's the alternative. If you're not going to be with me, then here's an alternative that you are attracted into because it's going to socket to the man, right? And then we take you down again and again and again. It's amazing. And my favorite one, I was at a Bitcoin conference in 2017, and I was trying to talk everybody. Bitcoin was running up, and I was trying to just say, look, because everybody was trading. And so they were swapping back and forth between different cryptos. And I said, you're creating realized gains. If you don't escrow in the dollar when it dumps, your tax liability is going to be bigger than the value of your whole position.
Yeah.
So for God's sakes, when you trade, when you create a taxable event, and they kept saying, oh, it's all secret. We don't have to pay taxes. I said, no. And it was after the dump in the Wall Street Journal, they announced 10,000 new auditors just going after crypto.
Yeah.
So they know what they're doing.
Yeah. So, that complex has been built. If you think about what strategy is, it's borrow more from Wall Street, bond vigilantes, hedge funds, raise more in equity, and get more Bitcoin in a centralized company.
So if you look at your advice, so you're saying if you do Bitcoin, self-custody and don't borrow.
Yes.
Because then you can rock and roll. You can rock and roll with the ups and downs. Right.
Correct. So my simple advice is that I think of so Bitcoin is, if you own it in self-custody, which is an if now, if you own it in self-custody, it's money that you can own and you can take with you whatever your government does. You may get exit taxes. You still have a legal framework to play within. But it's money you can own. It's money you can spend in a innocent until proven guilty system. If you're committing crime with it, you've created an immutable record. So,
right.
It's still, and it's money that has a fixed supply, which means that there only will be 21 million, but they can manipulate the short-term price. But that's always been the case with the Bitcoin exchanges. I know because I'm a shareholder in many of them.
Right.
Essentially, Mt. Gox was a fractional reserve Bitcoin because it lost 90% of the Bitcoin, but still owed that amount of Bitcoin to people that thought they had Bitcoin.
Right.
But then the exchange closes and then they realize they don't have the Bitcoin. And so self-custody is how you avoid that.
If somebody's listening to this and they say, okay, well, where do I go to do self-custody? How do I learn how to do self-custody? What are the wallets that I should use? What would you recommend?
It's a deeper subject, but I publish on simondixon.com different courses where you can learn how to self-custody.
Okay.
I'm fortunate enough to have no monetization, no sponsorship. I haven't got anything to sell. I'm literally just trying to build a community of people that want to get themselves more sovereign.
Right.
There's nothing to sell there,
Right.
But I have videos where you can watch how to self-custody and the different things. It's a deep subject and it's very boring for this, but
right.
My simple rules are learn how to self-custody.
Yeah.
Own more Bitcoin this month than the last month, regardless of price. So you won't out trade Wall Street, but you can out invest them. Own it in self-custody. You get to boycott the Fed. Really, it's money outside the Fed. If you don't own it via an ETF, you get to boycott BlackRock. If you don't borrow against it, then you're not creating fiat currency and giving them custody service to charge fees. So don't borrow against it. Don't use any leverage. Don't trade, and just have more Bitcoin this month than the previous month, and do that for a 4-year cycle.
I'm just going to add my caveat. If I'm right, and they change or pull the limit, or engineer a permanent dump, you want to be ready to run. So.
Yeah, but I don't think that that if we look at the construct of how Bitcoin's created, you cannot change 21 million unless you can co-opt all of the developers.
You can
own all of the mining ecosystem, get as much Bitcoin in an ETF, get all of the nodes to agree that you're going to upgrade, and then not have a user-activated soft fork. And so you actually the ability to change it from 21 million requires co-opting of almost every part of the ecosystem.
So in 1996, when I started litigating with the Department of Justice, I would have said that was impossible. Having litigated with the Department of Justice until 2011 and dealt with massive physical harassment, surveillance, and learning every dirty trick in the book, what I will tell you is I think it's much easier for them to do that than you probably think. So, and it was a shocking process to come to that conclusion. And it's a conversation I'd be happy to have with you, because the way you control technology is not through technology, but it's by controlling the people who manage the technology, and their ability to move in and manage and control thousands of companies and people is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have believed it was possible, but now I do. But I don't think that time is near. So it's not a 2026 problem. That's what I can tell you.
We can continue to debate it, but there are choke points across the whole of the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Absolutely.
And those need to be aware as certain risks,
right.
It's not a guaranteed thing. Yeah.
So before I turn two other things on Bitcoin, the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, we've seen both the president and the Secretary of Treasury say they're only going to put Bitcoin in the strategic reserve that they seize. And we just saw this seizure of the Prince Group. You've covered it, and it's remarkable. I was on the board of directors when the Department of Justice did a huge seizure of BCCI, the sort of BCCI situation, and did a huge seizure and didn't want to give the money back to the victims. They wanted to keep the money. It was the same exact fact pattern that we see in the Prince Group. And this one is extraordinary because you're talking about a huge cybercrime operation. And the U.S. goes in and seizes the Bitcoin and China, if I understand it, is arguing that the money should go back to the victims. And the U.S. is like, no, we're going to keep it. So any thoughts on what is happening now with this seizure and the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. So the language around the executive order for the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve was very similar to the Gold Seizure Act in 1933. And so you notice that some of the without the seizure, if you compare some of the points,
wow,
you'll see that there are very, very similar like conditions there, but it didn't have the seizure.
Simon, how did you figure that out?
Someone did an analysis. I think I used AI to just do an analysis between the two.
Wow.
Okay. But it's very interesting that some of the language seemed to have been borrowed from that.
Uh-huh.
Now the US government allegedly has, and we don't know this because there was a Freedom of Information FIRA that was very strange in terms of whether they had 10,000 Bitcoin or what they have.
Mm-hmm.
But now they're claiming they have 325,000 Bitcoin. No one can verify that. Now, that came from three pockets. The first was the Silk Road seizures.
Right.
And one of the first things the Trump administration did was pardon Ross Ulbricht,
Right.
which is the dark web website that was much of Bitcoin's early volume. And so, that's, I think, a legitimate seizure because who were the victims there? Drug dealers. So if reasonable case. But the second two are very illegitimate. The second one was, I know because I'm a Bitfinex shareholder, there was 119,000 Bitcoin hacked from Bitfinex. And I worked with the victims of the hack in order to put together a recovery plan where we didn't go into Chapter 11. And we actually recovered everybody's funds by, avoiding the Chapter 11 process, so the lawyers couldn't sell the Bitcoin and all the things that happened in Celsius and Mt. Gox. So I've got very niche experience from these different cases. However, the shareholders, which were the victims, because we made the victims shareholders, they recovered, or the Department of Justice recovered those Bitcoin. And so they managed to get 100,000 Bitcoin. Now, in terms of who they're telling us the hacker is, that's a wild story. Just look up Razzle Dazzle, the Crocodile of Wall Street, and you'll be amazed and shocked at what you see, who they're telling us the hacker is. But apparently it was her partner that had Ukrainian connections and Saudi passports and all sorts of weird things connect. Even Celsius, the Ponzi scheme, deep connections to Netanyahu, some of the hacks. One of the hacks was the shareholders, the niece and nephew of Benjamin Netanyahu. The co-founder of the company is now doing an AI startup with the Prime Minister's Office of Israel. The person that was head of loans is in the social media propaganda department for the IDF. Like, very strange connections that you see in all of these cases. And then don't even get me started on SBF and FTX. But Bitfinex, it was, those Bitcoin that were recovered by the Department of Justice belonged to the victims. And we thought as shareholders, because the Department of Justice is going to be giving them back, they haven't come back yet, and they were included on the balance sheet of the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. So I'm not sure what's going to happen there. But remember, Bitfinex is a partner with Tether. Tether suddenly gets allowed to operate a Genius Act compliant stablecoin and is contributing to the ballroom in the White House with the tech bros. Right. So you've got all these different things that are happening. And Bo Himes, which was part of the PayPal mafia, in terms of part of the David Sachs team, was the head of the crypto and AI department. He suddenly leaves the White House and has joined the board of Tether. So you get all of these different types of shenanigans that are happening. And then the third was, an outright scam that was done out of, what am I trying to say? Not Colombia. Why am I getting it? Cambodia.
Right.
It was done out of Cambodia, and China wanted to seize all the coins because there were Chinese victims. There was global victims, Americans, Canadians, Europeans, complete, fraud and scam. And now America announced that it's adding 127,000 Bitcoin to its strategic reserve that it seized. And so now it's got 325,000 Bitcoin in its strategic reserve that belong to Bitfinex victims and the victims of the fraud. And that's the Bitcoin strategic reserve.
So it's a very interesting model that you allow massive cybercrime, and then when it matures, you just basically seize everything and move it into the Department of Justice.
This is pure speculation because I got zero evidence for it, but in my mind, I've got a conspiracy theory that is consistent with my understanding of other things. But we're always told that there's Russian hackers, Chinese hackers, and North Korean hackers, and Lazarus. I've got a feeling that that's Israel. Right. And I think that these hacking operations, if they end up as Bitcoin strategic reserves on Treasury's balance sheet, and we know what happened to the confiscated gold from America. It was used as it sits on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet and Treasury's
Right.
balance sheet. So it's the collateral. But it doesn't help. It doesn't help the government in the end, because the power structure is the financial industrial complex. So I think the narrative is that we're going to save the dollar, we're going to save America.
Right. Exactly. That's the narrative. But is that strategic reserve being leased to BlackRock or any of the ETFs?
Not yet. So all we know is that we don't know where it's stored.
No, the marshals are using Coinbase.
Okay, so it's at Coinbase, and Coinbase is the custodian for the BlackRock ETFs and the other ETFs. So
Right.
And Coinbase, I was an early investor in, and once they went public, I sold all my shares. I'm kind of in a cleansing phase right now, where I'm trying to get back to being this self-custody Bitcoin purist. I invested in all these companies, and now they've been co-opted by the financial industrial complex. And so
Right.
as soon as they go public, I sell them and buy Bitcoin in self-custody. But Coinbase, is as soon as you are a public company, you're now part of the apparatus.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of research on the asset forfeiture fund at the department. At one point, I hired the lawyer that created it, and during my litigation. And anyway, so immediately I wanted to see who the custodian was as soon as they created it. And sure enough, the marshals had done a deal with Coinbase, and I thought, oh, BlackRock and marshals at the same time, how convenient.
Yeah, I do remember seeing it. It was Coinbase custody. Yeah, so the custody service was, the custody service was developed. Then they went public, and then they did, and now you had Operation Choke Point 2.0. You had all the crypto scam takeout, the Celsius Ponzi's, the FTX Ponzi's. You had all of them wiped out. You had the CZ takeover of, the US government takeover of Binance in the compliance side. You had the Biden administration that was very unfavorable.
Right.
Suddenly you get the Bitcoin ETF. Then you get the deregulation environment, the Trump administration, and then everything that the banks and financial institutions need to build the Bitcoin industrial complex.
Right. So Gary Gensler was my best friend in business school. And in fact, I got him an interview with Goldman Sachs. That was one of my claims to fame. He didn't have a suit, so I took him to Brooks Brothers and bought him a suit.
Yeah. So. Okay.
Anyway,
so again, I think the chairman of the SEC is, part of a greater power structure. Let's say that.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So how do we stop the control grid? So in America, if you look at how the control grid's working, and it's sort of the same model in each place, you have programmable money. So if you read the Genius Act, Treasury is set up to provide a pipe that every issuer has to feed into that is know your customer and money laundering regulations. But I'm assuming the whole Palantir AI system can come in through that pipe. And certainly what it looks like to me. So you got programmable money with the stable coins. Then you've got a push for a real digital ID with a real ID system. And then you have an extraordinary move locally to build out the hardware, both telecommunications, drones, and AI data centers to deliver, both the surveillance and the dynamic application of the programmable money. And so you've sort of got three legs to the stool, and people are pushing back on every one, but they're clearly designed to snap together. So in that kind of system, I don't see, there's no way to push back other than to scramble the system. So I don't know if you saw it, the former head of MI6 just came out and said that Starmer's plan for the digital ID was insane because you put everybody in one database and everybody's going to hack it.
Yep. And there's lots and lots of contracts between the UK government and Palantir. So I think it just feeds up to that same structure. I think the Department of Defense has Palantir contracts. The National Health Service has Palantir contracts. and there's Palantir's over everything. So Palantir, with Peter Thiel, and then the CIA funding through the Silicon Valley, all this stuff. So these are clearly front companies for privatizing
Right.
all of these control grids. All I say is the same thing I said with the Bitcoin side. Your job is to try and, I don't think nothing stops this train. Like I'm up for a fight, but I'm not up for a fight that I can't win. And so I think we have come too far, and I think your job is to exit the system where you can. And so what I tend to do is I try and get as much Bitcoin in self-custody with my fiat currency. I don't borrow against it, the things that I said. I hedge with gold, and I reallocate my money into community. Any fiat currency is in community banking if I need banking.
Mm-hmm.
I invest in any kind of decentralized systems that can create friction and resistance against it, decentralized artificial intelligence. And all of these have spectrums, because there's always a choke point at some point.
Right.
But I've come to the conclusion that it's about better rather than worse. Because if you do nothing because you're trying to achieve perfection, there is no perfection.
Right.
And then you have to spend local. Like, I really believe that people should support local business more than big business. I think cities are going to be very, very bad places to live. I think people should go urban. And across the country, you see, it's a weird phenomenon I've seen, because people build these amazing communities, but they tend to go around like a cult leader and some kind of like weird cult. Like, why not just do it without the cult? Like, why can't people just look after each other within a community? And so I do think...
Well, many do, but they don't talk about it, and they certainly don't brand it as a thing.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So, as much grass as you can touch, as much community, and just really... I think we get into a higher purpose at this stage. Like, for me, I personally believe that there is a higher plan, which is our creator. And whether you believe that or not, whatever your spiritual or religious beliefs may be, I kind of have to go with that. Mm-hmm. And know that in every empire, it's like an elastic band. You stretch it, you stretch it, you stretch it. But look at the British Empire. It's a shambles. Look at the Portuguese Empire. Look at the Italian Empire. Look at the Roman Empire. Look at all these previous empires. They are just shadows of what looked like an unstoppable network at the time.
Right.
And so, community, whatever your beliefs may be, I believe that money also has spiritual energy. Mm-hmm. So if you achieve your money through means that are very questionable, and in your heart whether it's questionable or not, you may unintentionally, part of what I say about all of these systems is many people don't know who they work for. Mm-hmm. Like, Jack Mallers probably doesn't know who he works for, because it's all this, these layers and layers and layers. You just think you're building a business and you're working for your funders.
So one of the things I like about your work is you understand the financial bazooka, and that it can, you have to be prepared to duck at any point, mm-hmm. right? And that's essential.
Yeah. So, and you're going to need community. You're going to need as much autonomy and sovereignty as you can. And we have to look after each other. And to look after each other, we need to recognize that these devices are feeding us hatred. They're stopping us from having children. They're psychological operations. Now, I can't avoid it. I need AI to be as productive and function in today's world.
Right.
And so it's just a commitment to, I think, listen to your heart, understand that you're not going to get perfect. You can only do better and worse. And if I'm choosing between buying on Amazon or buying from my local farmer, I know that I consciously will try to buy from my local farmer. If the question is, do I give BlackRock my money or do I hold it in self-custody? Sometimes tax and inheritance means you have to be a part of this system.
Right.
but where you can, always just try and do better and better and better. And I think there is spiritual energy that comes from that.
Right.
And I believe that there is a higher plan. And I don't think evil gets rewarded without being destroyed.
Yes. Well, it's got this. I think this whole system, the reason I pulled out in 98 was I thought the plan was going to fail. I just think if you look at what they're doing and how they're doing it, it has the seeds of its own destruction. And I don't want to be a part of it. So,
yeah.
Right. But
yeah, I really believe in boycotting. And you know, if your vote doesn't matter, which I've come to the conclusion it doesn't, in terms of the political system is completely captured. And so if your vote doesn't make a difference, your money does. And
your actions,
yes.
your money and your actions make huge difference.
I was
going to get personal and say I hope you're having lots and lots of children.
Yeah. So it's a self-responsibility. That's what they want you to be the opposite of it. I think you said when they give a title to a narrative, it's the opposite. You know, every accusation is a confession. These are truisms, you know, and the media is just simply a function of what they want you to believe, not what is true. And so once you recognize these things, there's an empowerment in it when you're saying, all right, well, why does the Financial Times want me to believe this is where everyone's allocating capital? There's an agenda behind it. And so, you know, and, you know, where you can share this content, like I think there's power in information.
I also think they're trying to make you incoherent.
Yes.
So, and it's very important to stay coherent.
Yes.
And yeah.
And we just have to recognize that there is vast evil, but there is vast good. And speak to your neighbors, speak to people, and you realize we are good people. We do have to get along. And the vast majority of people, you know, so just try and make people better. And what else can we do?
By any chance, have you gotten to know or met John Christensen?
I haven't, no.
Do you know who he is?
I don't know.
He made a documentary with what's the name of the reporter? I think it was Nicholson. It's called The Spider's Web. It's about the British offshore system. And we have an interview with him on the Solari Report, and you're eligible for a complimentary subscription. I'll send you one. All guests get a complimentary subscription. But I would suggest you look up the documentary The Spider's Web and watch it.
I had complete access to all the client files, and this is what I found. There were some insider traders, some market rigging, some avoiding disclosure of conflict of interest, illicit arms trading, illicit political campaign donations, contract kickbacks, bribery, fraudulent invoicing, trade mispricing, and at the bottom, tax evasion.
If you come from the same kind of background, you know the right people, then all the kind of legal niceties will often fall away. You can get away with doing all sorts of things.
John Christensen might be somebody you would like to connect with. He's very, very special. And
all right.
He's done a lot of digging, particularly in the islands. I think he was economic development officer on Jersey. So
amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really grateful to have found you and that you brought me on and that I can be a part of the community, because I'm ashamed that I haven't understood more of your work, because you seem to have been down this rabbit hole for longer than myself. And I can't wait to discover more of what you've created and what you've helped people with.
Please don't go down all the rabbit holes I've gone down.
Yeah.
It's a waste of it's not a good use of your time, but you know, in the process of trying to figure out what in the world was going on, I think I've tried to go down just about every rabbit hole there is. And in fact, we did an interview. Joseph Farrell, he's a scholar that I do a lot with. We did an interview, Who is Mr. Global, trying to explain the very top of the system. And what things look like from Mr. Global's point of view. And all we do is we go through all the different theories, and describe them. So,
Yeah.
I have some insight into the system, but I don't begin to have, I couldn't prove what's going on in a court of law. I'll say that.
Absolutely. Well, it's a collective thing. And I'll leave one rabbit hole if people want to go down. Many people ask whether Bitcoin was created by the CIA and who Satoshi Nakamoto is. I just created a 3-hour video on YouTube, so you can look up Simon Dixon, Satoshi Nakamoto, CIA. And if anyone wants to go down that rabbit hole, I pulled together.
Okay. I saw the title, but I didn't realize what it was. 3 hours. Okay.
All right, so today we're diving into a theory that's been absolutely blowing up the crypto space. It comes from a nearly 3-hour-long podcast episode hosted by the one and only Simon Dixon, a true Bitcoin OG, on his show Bitcoin Hard Talk. And it was all about trying to answer a question that just keeps coming up. Specifically, this one wild theory about who really created Bitcoin. And when I say wild, I mean, we're talking about a story that pulls in international spies, the mob. I mean, it's a real rabbit hole. Okay, let's get into the first clue. And believe it or not, the theory starts with the name itself. So the podcast brings up this idea from a guy named Richard Warner. He points out that in Japanese, you say the family name first, so it would be Nakamoto Satoshi. And if you break that down, Nakamoto can translate to center origin, and Satoshi, that can mean intelligence. So you put them together, and what do you get? Central intelligence. Kind of spooky, right? So the question is, was this some kind of clever wink and a nod from an intelligence agency? A clue left behind, just hiding in plain sight for anyone who bothered to look. Okay, but that leads to the next big question, the motive. I mean, why on earth would a government agency create a decentralized currency? It seems totally counterintuitive. Well, the podcast dives into 2 pretty compelling and honestly kind of chilling potential reasons. First, there's the gateway drug theory. The idea is that Bitcoin was just a trial balloon, a way to get us all comfortable with the idea of digital money before they roll out their own stuff, central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, which they would totally control. The second theory is, well, it's a lot darker. It's the honeypot theory, that Bitcoin was designed to get everyone to pour their money into it, only for the creators to flip a switch on a secret back door and seize it all. But here's where the story gets really, really weird. Just when you think it's all about spies and government agencies, the podcast takes a massive left turn. It suggests a deeper, darker origin story that doesn't start with the CIA, it starts with the mob.
Okay, I'll take a look, Simon. Well, it's been just a real pleasure. I've enjoyed your work for a while now, a couple years, and I really appreciate what you're trying to do, and I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for joining us on the Solari Report. Tell everybody again where they can find you and follow your work.
Yeah, so I'm mainly on X at Simon Dixon Twit, from when it was called Twitter. And I'm on YouTube, Simon Dixon. I go live every week where I do This Week in Bitcoin, This Week in Macro, This Week in Geopolitics, 3 hours every week, following the money in real time.
Well, but it's good because you connect the dots between all these different areas, and it's very good.
I do, and then I use AI to condense it down to 5 minute and 20 minutes as well. And then I publish those on my blog, simondixon.com.
Okay. I've been using Claude. What have you been using?
I got a team, but we're mainly in like the Google ecosystem. And then we got we invested in like some decentralized companies, which we've been playing with as well. So, but it's mainly my team at this stage.
Okay. Okay. Well, Simon Dixon, you have a wonderful day, and thank you for joining us on the Solari Report.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have a great evening. Bye.